Magnificent Monday to each of you, and welcome to the Locked On Grizzlies podcast. The Grizzlies had a very active weekend, and though their 5-game winning streak ended yesterday in a loss to the Portland Trailblazers, plenty of successes to talk about on the absolutely incredible run of offense from Dillon Brooks, both the good and bad from a 1-1 weekend with the win over the Kings and loss to the Trailblazers, and a preview of tonight's game against the Oklahoma City Thunder on this edition of the Locked On Grizzlies podcast. Here we go.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And it's crazy, but it's finally arrived. The holiday season is in full swing. It's hard to believe that there's only a few weeks left in the 2021 calendar year, but yet here we are. Hope you had a wonderful weekend, and welcome to the Locked On Grizzlies podcast. My name, as always, is Shawn Coleman. It's a pleasure to be with you once again. This is my fourth season covering the Grizzlies, right for them over at Grizzly Bear Blues. Credentialed media member, your host here at Locked On Grizzlies, your Grizzlies every day. Of course, you can find me at StatsSAC, the show at Locked On Grizz, the podcast, wherever it's available, Spotify, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, the Odyssey app, wherever you choose to listen, that's where we'll be. And right here on YouTube as well, hit that subscribe button below. Lets us know that you enjoy the show, lets others find the show, and just in general, makes the show as enjoyable as possible. Also want to thank you for making Locked On Grizzlies your first listen of the day. Make sure you also check out the Locked On NBA podcast. So much going on around the NBA, from unfortunately players being held out due to COVID, due to the to also the latest NBA trade rumors going on around the league. Check out the Locked On NBA podcast as your second listen after checking out Locked On Grizzlies. Also, we want to remind you of our title sponsor for today's show, which of course is Prize Picks. It's the best play when it comes to daily fantasy sports. It's daily fantasy made easy. Put in the promo code NBA when you go check out prizepicks.com and enjoy all the great opportunities there at prizepicks.com. So the Grizzlies had a couple of games, an active weekend for Memphis, that started off with a bit of a surprise that the Grizzlies even played against the Kings, with how much the Kings are being impacted, like many teams around the league, by COVID right now. But of course, the Grizzlies were able to play the game against the Kings, get a needed victory, and then they came into yesterday against the Portland Trailblazers, facing the Trailblazers for the second time in 5 days. And unfortunately, the Grizzlies were not able to get the job done. A rare sight in recent weeks, as the Grizzlies suffered only their second loss in 12 games. We'll get to the details of those specific games from this weekend in just a moment. But first, I want to talk about, as I mentioned, COVID is certainly something that has, made its impact on the NBA. There have been recent news, to where the NBA is going to go back to COVID protocols like they did during last year, really testing, going to, as many protocols as possible to try to stop, now starting to be overwhelming at times for teams, cases of COVID that are impacting teams across the NBA. And it also was announced that, NBA teams, as they were to potentially, be without a certain amount of players, due to COVID protocols, that teams will need to start signing replacement players, basically, to replace players that they will be without. So many different things going on across the NBA. For the Grizzlies, though, thankfully, they have been a team that has not been impacted so much by COVID so far yet this season. Knock on whatever, piece of wood may be near you. But the Grizzlies, thankfully, have not been impacted that much by COVID. As a matter of fact, Ja Morant just returned yesterday for the first time in 10 days after being put into the, NBA's health and safety protocols. Now, Zaire Williams currently is himself, though he likely was going to be out for whatever duration he'll miss due to already being injured. That's the big thing that's, really helped the Grizzlies out in terms of whichever players of theirs have gone into health and safety protocols so far this year. Ja Morant and Zaire Williams, they were already out with injuries. Well, another player that went into health and safety protocols about 10 days ago was Dillon Brooks. But of course, Dillon Brooks, he missed the game when the Lakers came to town. He missed that game against the Lakers. The Grizzlies were able to get a very impressive victory without him, but thankfully Dillon Brooks was able to come back from health and safety protocols by getting two negative test within 24 hours. And since Dillon Brooks has been back, he's been on an absolute tear. Like, we're not just talking about an impressive offensive stretch for Dillon Brooks standards. We're talking about one of the more impressive offensive stretches we have seen from a Grizzlies player now in years. That is correct, in years. But the crazy thing is that it's the second time we've seen this level of offensive play from Dillon Brooks this season, which is so highly encouraging. Of course, I'm getting at the fact that Dillon Brooks yesterday set a new career high for points in a game with 37, and every bit of it was needed. With Jaren Jackson Jr. having an off night, Desmond Bane struggling from the field, the Grizzlies offense overall struggling, as a whole, Dillon Brooks took it upon himself to do everything that he could to put the Grizzlies in a position to win. And he certainly did. It's just that the Grizzlies could not make the necessary shots down the stretch to be able to get it done. And at the end of the day, let's be honest, over a 5-game stretch, it's very rare that you want Dillon Brooks or really any player in general besides maybe Ja Morant to take nearly 100 total shots over a 5-game stretch. But when someone is producing at the level Dillon Brooks is right now, you certainly live with it. It's certainly something that you're fine with. Over his past 5 games, Dillon Brooks has scored 130 points. He's averaged 24 points per game. But the key thing that stands out about this is that Dillon Brooks not only is 12 of 30 from 3, averaging 2.5 threes per game on 6 attempts over that stretch, he also, and this is the big thing for me, he also is averaging over 6 free throws per game, or right at 6 free throws made per game, shooting 88% from the free throw line. This is the second time this year that Dillon Brooks has gone on this type of stretch. The first was obviously complimenting Ja Morant in the playoffs when Dillon Brooks just absolutely went off against the Utah Jazz, forming a very formidable 1-2 punch with Ja Morant. One of the most successful 1-2 punches in the playoffs to start out their careers that a team has ever seen in NBA history. But now this is the second time that Dillon Brooks has put together a stretch of impressive offensive play that we've only seen players like Mike Conley, Marc Gasol, Ja Morant, and for a stretch, Tyreke Evans do for the Grizzlies over the past 6 or 7 years. We've not seen Jaren Jackson Jr. do this. We've not seen Desmond Bane do it to this level. But now we have seen Dillon Brooks play at honestly an all-star level as a player like he has as a two-way difference maker over the past 5 games. We've now seen him do it on the biggest stage of his career when the Grizzlies were in the playoffs, and also when the Grizzlies needed it the most without Ja Morant. And so, yes, I do think it's significant. I don't think that this stretch of impressive offensive performance from Dillon Brooks, I don't think it's a fluke by any means. Now, let me specify or clarify. I don't mean that I think Dillon Brooks is all of a sudden going to be a player who's going to average, over 22, 23 points per game, and that he's going to turn into a consistent all-star level type performer. Because don't make any mistake, right now, over the past 10 games, Dillon Brooks is playing like an all-star. With as important as he is to the Grizzlies defense, and now how productive and at times dominant he's been offensively over the past 5 games, Dillon Brooks over that stretch is playing like an all-star. I don't think that he's an all-star type talent, but he's now shown multiple glimpses this year that he can play to that level when it's needed. And while you may not want him taking 20 shots a game, especially when Ja Morant eventually does come back, you may not want Dillon taking 20 shots a game. He may not, maintain scoring 24 to 25 points a game. It's probably not going to happen. That's perfectly fine. The key, though, is while he may not be performing at that level game in and game out, you want Dillon to produce like this on a rate basis as much as possible when he's on the court playing offense. And there are indications where his offensive success could be sustainable. Obviously, shooting the best free throw percentage of his career at the highest rate of his career. He's shooting the best that he has from within the arc, getting to the rim more. He's becoming a more balanced and resourceful scorer, much like Desmond Bane and Jaren Jackson Jr. have this year as well. So while we may not see this type of stretch from Dillon continue, over, a full season or even half a season, the point is that it's now happened at the second time, for the second time this year when it's been needed the most. And it's also proof that there is another level or two to Dillon's offense when he needs to go there. And not only can he go there, he can go there multiple times in a row to put the Grizzlies in a position to win. So it has certainly been very fun to witness. And while it's fair to question how sustainable it is, at the end of the day, we do know now with confidence that Dillon Brooks can reach this level of offensive production. And that when he does, it typically puts the Grizzlies in a good position to win. But while it was impressive to see Dillon's play this weekend, overall, the Grizzlies had some successes, but also a few struggles. We'll discuss that in just a moment. But before we do that, I want to tell you of a successful way that you can avoid struggles this holiday season, and that's checking out Truebill.com. Truebill.com is a great source, because this holiday season, for many of us, there probably are going to be promotions out there that we certainly want to check out. But the thing about those promotions, unfortunately, is that they could be, if they're free trials, they could lead to unwanted subscriptions and unwanted costs. Well, Truebill.com is a great source because you can go to Truebill.com and you can keep up with your subscriptions, and it allows for you to avoid having to worry about those free trials turning into unwanted costs. All you need to do is download Truebill.com and put in the promo code Locked On NBA, and it will allow for you to be able to Truebill.com/Locked On NBA will allow for you to go to a place that you not only can keep up with subscriptions, but will save you money to make sure those free trials do not become unwanted costs. Make sure to check out Truebill.com today. Obviously, it's going to be a very fun week. It's going to be an active week for the Grizzlies, but also obviously Christmas, the holiday season is here. So some fun content here from Locked On Grizzlies. Later on this week, going to look at Desmond Bane through the first 100 games of his career. Obviously, he has stepped up to be one of the better breakout stars in the league this season, but he also is truly stepping up as an historically productive talent through the first 100 games of his career. I'll look at that later this week, plus a holiday wish list for the Grizzlies going into a very tough stretch as we go from the holiday season into the new year. That and much more on this week's editions of the Locked On Grizzlies podcast. Make sure you certainly check it out. So obviously the play of Dillon Brooks was the headline over the weekend. 5 straight games, 130 total points on those games, shooting well from three, getting to the line, just has been an absolutely wonderful production of offense. But the Grizzlies themselves certainly had a very interesting weekend. Now, I and others, myself, just talked about, to start the show about the COVID protocols, how they specifically have impacted the Grizzlies. But Friday night, the game against the Kings was certainly in doubt at times. And in my opinion, and it seems the opinion of others, I still wouldn't have played the game. And the reason why I would not have played the game is because, thankfully, while it seems as if the Grizzlies are not going to be impacted by the fact that the Kings have been one of the teams in the NBA most impacted by COVID, it was unfortunate for the Kings. The Kings were at a disadvantage on Friday night because of the level of players that were out for them. But the thing is at the end of the day, the Grizzlies themselves can only control what they can control, and they once again took care of business on Friday night. Desmond Bane stepped up, had an absolutely incredible, productive night himself. Unfortunately, his struggles on the Sunday, Desmond Bane, including the game on Friday night against the Sacramento Kings, Desmond Bane in his previous 15 games, including that game against the Kings, there have been 9 games over that 15-game stretch where Desmond Bane had 4 or more threes in a game. The past 15 games for Desmond Bane have not only been a resume builder for Most Improved Player of the Year, in my opinion. The other thing that stood out is that they also have truly shown that he's not just one of the best young shooters in the league as a label. He entered this NBA season, in my opinion, being one of the NBA's best young shooters. But he's now turned into one of the best overall shooters, period. Like that's just simply the case. When you combine the quantity that he's now taking of shots with the accuracy and quality, it's hard to find many other players who offer a better combo of being a shooter from distance than Desmond Bane, and it certainly has been a great revelation for this Grizzlies offense. So it was another impressive game for Desmond Bane. Obviously, Dillon Brooks scoring 20-plus points. Both of those players stepping up as Jaren Jackson Jr., as we've discussed. Jaren right now is certainly struggling from beyond the arc, but he's still making a big defensive impact. And another very good defensive game on Friday. Had a good defensive game yesterday. But right now, unfortunately, Jaren Jackson Jr.'s shot is not falling. So Desmond Bane and Dillon Brooks were able to step up on Friday night. But the other key thing that stood out to me from Friday was the fact that on Wednesday of last week against the Trailblazers, as well as Friday against the Kings, the Grizzlies had multiple occurrences. They had an occurrence on the Wednesday game and an occurrence on the Friday game where they got down by double-digit points. On Wednesday, the Grizzlies were down 78-68 with like 3.5 minutes left in the third quarter. How did they respond? They went on a 45-25 point run to be able to win the game by 10 points on Wednesday night. Well, on Friday night, the Grizzlies got down 50-35 to a shorthanded Kings team that just absolutely was outplaying the Grizzlies. The reason why the Kings had the lead is because they were being the more aggressive team. How did the Grizzlies respond? Between the second half of the second quarter and the entire third quarter, and again, the third quarter has been a stretch this season where the Grizzlies have struggled, but on Friday night, after being down 15, to end the second quarter and through the third quarter, the Grizzlies, I believe, went on like a 53-25 run and were able to get a big enough lead to where they were able to blow out the Kings. The next evolution of this Grizzlies team is as a sustainable winner, and one of the trademarks of a sustainable winner is a team that, even though they get down big at times in a game, they have the confidence to put together a long stretch of success in a game that defines that overall, that defines the game overall and is a reason why they win. And the Grizzlies have shown the ability to do that multiple times over this stretch of winning. And the two best examples are this past Wednesday and Friday night when they were able to get victories despite being down big in those games. Well, unfortunately, the thing is that no matter how good you are when it comes to winning basketball games or how frequently you're doing it, sometimes you're just going to have an off night. And that, unfortunately, is what happened to the Grizzlies yesterday. Damian Lillard coming off a game in which he scored. Evidently, that game against the Grizzlies on Wednesday night for Damian Lillard was a wake-up call because he has responded now with a 43-point effort on Friday night to help the Trailblazers win, but also last night, once again, stepping up and having one of the more productive first quarters we've seen from a player against the Grizzlies in quite a while. Damian Lillard, 17 points, 7 free throws. It's been nearly 2 years since a player made 7 or more free throws in a quarter against the Grizzlies, and that's exactly what propelled Damian Lillard to have such a big impact in the first half. But what hurt the Grizzlies was the fact that, yes, Dillon Brooks was with his 37 points, a career high. He was outstanding. He was doing every possible thing that he could do to help the Grizzlies win the game last night. But unfortunately, what hurt the Grizzlies were a few key areas or a key lack of production. Number one, it was the fact that basically Damian Lillard and Dillon Brooks, they were canceling each other out with how excellent they were playing offensively. But it was Norman Powell who, once again, just like he did on Wednesday, he had an outstanding game. I think scoring 29, 30 points himself last night. He was clearly the second best player, or he was clearly the third best player that either team had to offer on Sunday night. Even if you feel that Dillon may have been the best player overall in yesterday's game, Damian Lillard and Norman Powell were clearly the second and third best players. And in the closing minutes, it was Norman Powell who was complimenting Damian Lillard to make the Trailblazers offense more consistent. The Grizzlies just could not find someone to compliment Dillon Brooks, and that made the difference in the game as to why Portland was able to win it. They just simply had more sources that were making more shots later on in the game. But another key thing that stood out was we had talked about the fact that, coming into Sunday's game over their previous 10 games, Kyle Anderson had been like a plus 89. DeAnthony Melton had been something of like a plus 75. Just absolutely outstanding play from Melton and Anderson when they had been on the court that were leading to huge advantages being created for the Grizzlies. Where last night, it wasn't created. It would how special Dame was playing, despite how special Dillon was playing, with how productive Damian Lillard was being, the way for the Grizzlies to win last night was when he was off the court, and they didn't. And that's what kept Portland in the game for Damian Lillard and Norman Powell to eventually let their good play get the Trailblazers the victory. So you're going to have games like that. It's going to happen. It happens to everybody. But the big key from this weekend that I think stands out, if you want to talk about the trademarks of a sustainable winner, is that the Grizzlies have now won 10 of their last 12. And listen, they were a 500 team before Ja Morant went out. There's going to be stretches where the Grizzlies, especially with the tough ends to the month of December and a pretty tough January, there are going to be stretches over 8 to 10 games where the Grizzlies may play 500 or worse going on for the rest of the season. But there are not very many teams this year who are going to put together a stretch of winning 10 games of their last 12, and hopefully after tonight, 11 of their past 13. There's not many teams that are going to do that this year. And in a year where you have such a big grouping of some teams struggling, some teams overachieving, but many teams in both conferences who have similar records, a team that can go on a 10 to 12 or an 11 out of 13 type run when it comes to winning, those are the teams that are really going to put themselves in a favorable position when it comes to the playoffs. So even though the Grizzlies may eventually run into a few stretches, as the schedule goes along this year, where maybe they lose 3 out of 4, or maybe they lose 4 out of 6. So far this year, the longest losing streak the Grizzlies have is 3 games. But they now won 10 out of 12, and again, hopefully 11 out of 13 tonight. And despite how the Grizzlies have looked at times where they either have had blowout losses or they've had inexplicable losses like they did yesterday, though yesterday wasn't inexplicable. It was a game that the Grizzlies shouldn't have won, we'll put it that way. Though the Grizzlies have run into those type of situations at times this year, the fact that they have put together this winning stretch that not many other teams are going to be able to match is something that's going to really, really stand out in supporting them, I feel, as the season goes along. But before we get to the tough into December and also getting into a tough stretch of games in January, the Grizzlies have another very winnable game tonight. However, despite the fact that the last time Oklahoma City visited Memphis, the Grizzlies produced the largest margin of victory ever in NBA history, tonight could be a totally different story, as both Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Josh Giddey should be in uniform for the Oklahoma City Thunder, and it will make them a formidable matchup for the Grizzlies. We'll discuss that in just a moment. But as I mentioned, over the past several weeks, without Ja Morant, the Grizzlies have had options when it comes to leading their offense. You're wanting the same source of success, right? You're wanting for the Grizzlies to have consistent offense, but you got different types of options you can rely on to do that. Well, that's the similar thing that when it comes to Built Bar for your daily routine. Listen, you want the same source of success. You want a source that can provide great taste, health benefits, and energy. And Built Bar can do all that. But you want to be able to have options to have it, enjoy it in. And there's over 18 different flavors that you can choose from at Built.com. Have it in the morning for breakfast or in the afternoon as a snack. But if you go to Built.com right now, you put in the promo code LOCKED15, you'll get 15% off your next order from Built Bar. You can go to Built.com, put in the promo code LOCKED-ON, get 15% off your next order from Built Bar. Another fun thing I can tell you about is that the Grizzlies certainly have been a fun team at times to bet on this year. And if you go to betonline.ag, it's the fastest and easiest way for you to be able to bet on sports. With the new and updated website going through your laptop or mobile device, check out betonline.ag today. And if you put in the promo code LOCKED-ON, you'll get a 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. NFL, NHL, NBA, UFC, whatever you choose to bet on, BetOnline is going to be a great source for you to do it. Again, the fastest and easiest way for you to check out all your betting and wagering wants. Go to betonline.ag today. Again, we can't thank you enough for making Locked On Grizzlies your first listen of the day. But with all these different players being held out due to health and safety protocols, I'm sure that's probably having an impact on your fantasy team. What's the best source to go to get the latest on how what players could really make an impact during this holiday season for your fantasy team? Check out Locked On Fantasy NBA with Josh Lloyd, the #1 fantasy basketball source in the world, as your second listen of the day after you've checked out Locked On Grizzlies as your first listen. Obviously, it's a crazy time right now when it comes to, how many players are being held out due to health and safety protocols. And I know that it's, a big topic of discussion, but it is pretty eye-opening how it currently is impacting teams. Well, two teams right now that have not, luckily for them, that have not really had that much of an impact on their roster so far by health and safety protocols are the Grizzlies and the Oklahoma City Thunder. And of course, these two teams meeting for the second time, in 3 weeks. Obviously, the last time that they met was a historic night in terms of positivity for the Grizzlies and negativity for the Oklahoma City Thunder, as the Grizzlies were able to beat the Thunder 152-79, producing the biggest victory in terms of a victory margin in NBA history in the process. Well, the thing about it is this, is that in the NBA, that's why it's very, very, in my opinion, it's a flawed approach to truly judge a team based off one game. Because since that game, the Oklahoma City Thunder are 3-3, a team that clearly is likely best suited to have another year in which they focus on getting into the lottery, getting a high draft pick. But you're starting to also see stretches of play from this Oklahoma City Thunder team where not only are they being competitive, but they truly are starting to show why they still have a very exciting future, not only because of their bevy of draft picks, but also because of their current talent. And two of the biggest reasons why are Shai Gilgeous-Alexander as well as Josh Giddey, two players that did not play in that game a few weeks ago where the Grizzlies blew out the Thunder. Now, if they would have played with how well the Grizzlies played, I think the Grizzlies still would have won, pretty confidently in that game. But there's no doubt that both Gilgeous-Alexander and Josh Giddey are two impactful players for the Thunder. And it's a big reason why, again, the Thunder are 3-3 over their past 6 games since that big loss to Memphis, but also why they could easily be 4-2. The Devontae Graham, shot at the buzzer, the miraculous shot that he made for the Pelicans is the reason why the Thunder are not 4-2. But Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, he hit the big shot against the Pelicans to tie the game a few nights ago. And then he also hit the game winner against the Los Angeles Clippers. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, once again, is playing at an all-star level. And don't forget, his play earlier this calendar year, last basketball season against the Grizzlies, was a big reason why the Thunder were able to steal a big victory against Memphis. And of course, Josh Giddey, with his overall play this year, he certainly has been a welcome addition to the Thunder. He's shown time and time again why the Grizzlies, who reportedly had interest in him in the NBA draft, why they had that interest, because of how well he has played. But you're again also seeing some of these younger Thunder players really start to step up and define their roles. Lou Dort, who we know is a very effective defender, he has stepped up and has been a good complementary source, both as an outside scorer, but also is showing some improving scoring prowess itself. And a first-round pick from this year, Trey Mann, has also stepped up and being a source of instant offense off this bench. So not only are you seeing this Oklahoma City Thunder start to see some of their younger players really find their grooves when it comes to their productivity, you're also seeing a deeper team as these young players continue to figure out their roles. So the Grizzlies are going to have another tough game on the schedule for them tonight. And again, in my opinion, it's important for the Grizzlies to get this one. Like, I know that with the Grizzlies having won 10 out of 11 coming into last night's game, it's going to be times where you're going to see a team struggle. And at the end of the day, I don't think anyone is going to call the Grizzlies one of the more talented teams in the league, but they've certainly been playing like it. However, you're going to have games every year where you struggle. Well, the key for this Grizzlies team, and as they continue to show throughout their time under Taylor Jenkins, they're very resilient and they typically bounce back. But in my opinion, there is a bit more riding on this game to bounce back, because with the Grizzlies playing on the second night of a back-to-back, plus the Thunder obviously being a much tougher opponent this time around, with SGA and Giddey likely in the lineup when they weren't last time, and also the fact that the Grizzlies are going to have a tough part of their schedule, a remaining December schedule that includes games against both the Warriors and the Suns, it's important for the Grizzlies to get this game tonight. It's important to put as many wins as possible together so that the Grizzlies can have the way to weather this storm of a difficult schedule that'll come their way. Now, I say all this because I think that it is important. I don't say it out of a lack of confidence in the Grizzlies being able to bounce back. I do say it, though, that I do think it's not the best way to look at things if you look at this game against the Thunder and you look back a few weeks ago and you're like, oh, we handled them like crazy, then we'll be able to get this done no problem. I don't think that's the case. I don't think the Grizzlies think that's the case. But another thing that does stand out about tonight's game is that the Thunder are going to attempt threes. They are going to put an emphasis on shooting the three. The key for the Grizzlies is getting back to being resourceful, shooting the threes themselves. And that includes Desmond Bane and Jaren Jackson Jr. being sources to do that. Because I'll say this, with Lou Dort, Josh Giddey, and SGA now all on the court, the Thunder can offer some difficulty to opposing players shooting the three. SGA, Dort, and others, they can make life tough on Dillon Brooks as well as Desmond Bane shooting the three. The Grizzlies are going to have to counter by getting Jaren Jackson Jr. back to finding his stroke from three, but also a big key for tonight's game. Two big keys to me are not only the Grizzlies defending the three well themselves. Yes, the Thunder are 29th in the league coming into tonight's game shooting the three, but we all know the Grizzlies haven't had the best of luck. Now, they've had a bit of luck as of late, but overall, they haven't had the best of luck when it comes to teams struggling from three, continuing to do that against the Grizzlies. A lot of teams have really found their stroke from three against Memphis. But if the Grizzlies can defend the three tonight, but the big key, it is that Memphis can, if they can get back to by far creating significant advantages when Kyle Anderson and DeAnthony Melton are on the court against the Thunder's second unit tonight. If the Grizzlies can find that advantage once again and defend the three, I think they should be just fine. But they're going to have to get a big contribution. This is going to need to be a game where Jaren Jackson Jr. steps up, and barring any type of injury addition to the Grizzlies' injury report, you certainly hope that Jaren Jackson Jr. will be able to do that. Now, let's look at the other thing, the other potential X factor that's out there. I don't feel that Ja Morant will be coming back in tonight's game. Would I be surprised? Not necessarily. I don't necessarily think Ja Morant will make an appearance in tonight's game, though I do think there is a small chance. However, at the end of the day, if the Grizzlies can get Ja back, that's absolutely outstanding. But I do think that the key tonight for the Grizzlies, the three big keys, are Jaren Jackson Jr. stepping up in a favorable matchup for himself, the Grizzlies being able to defend the three well to where they have to make the Oklahoma City Thunder really get into a half-court offense, and as a young team doing that, I don't put much faith in the Thunder to find much success being able to create their own shots consistently through schemes if the three's not there. But also the Grizzlies, once again, winning the bench minutes, especially from a significant advantage being created between the combo of DeAnthony Melton and Kyle Anderson. If the Grizzlies can do those three things, I think they certainly will be in a position to win. And on the very slim, and I feel again it's a very slim chance, though I'm not ruling it out, on the very slim chance that Ja Morant returns, that'll make it an even more exciting night and obviously help Memphis be able to win the game. So yes, it's going to be important for Memphis to win the game. And yes, it's important to note Ja Morant's return is likely right around the corner. Hopefully with whatever develops, the Grizzlies will be able to get a victory as again they head into a very tough stretch to end the month of December, but they start off a very fun week the right way. We're going to have a very fun week here for you all week. Make sure you check out the Locked On Grizzlies podcast wherever podcasts are available, right here on YouTube, and of course later on this week celebrating 100 games of Desmond Bane and a holiday wish list for the Grizzlies moving forward. That and much more. Go Grizzlies! We'll have the reaction to this game tonight against the Thunder on tomorrow's edition of the Locked On Grizzlies podcast. Until then, have a great night, and we'll talk to you soon here on the Locked On Grizzlies podcast.